Hi there, this is Kirsty Denny on the Great Awakening Generator. We're here tonight with our Neurodiversity Controversies segment, and we're welcoming back Tessa Grigg. So Tessa's been on the show once before, and we mentioned primitive reflexes, but we didn't actually get round much to going into it. So we really want to focus on that tonight. So Tessa's a kinesiologist, she's an educator, and she's a lecturer in child development. And I'm just going to throw it straight over to you. So Tessa, what is a primitive reflex?
Oh, thanks, Kirsty. In my happy place, primitive reflexes are something that I stumbled across a long time ago, probably 20 some number like that years ago. And for me, it was just sort of a bit of an awakening because it gave me the answers to many questions that I had. So my question always was, why does a child with very few risk factors, so it's got one or two parents who are caring for them, the child's in an environment that's, rich educationally, it's secure, all those things, why is it not learning? And so when I learned about primitive reflexes, the light bulbs all were going off in my head, and it was like, I get the problem. So let me go back a step. So what happens is, in utero, every child, well, nearly every child, most children will develop a set of what we call primitive reflexes, and about 70 have been identified. So there's quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And what happens is they develop in the womb, most of them. Some of them are postural reflexes that develop afterwards, but a lot of these ones develop in the womb. And what they do is they help the child to get down the birth canal.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole process, the child does sort of a little, what we call a reflex dance. They sort of move their shoulders and their head moves and their hips are flicking from side to side. So anyone who's had a baby, that is not going to, the reflex dance is not on your mind at that point, but that is actually what the little baby is doing. And that whole time that they're going down the birth canal and using those reflexes is really important, because reflexes are one of those things where you basically want to turn all the light switches on by using them. And so once you've got the light switches on, you can then turn them all off. So we talk about unintegrated reflexes. So these reflexes after the child's born are then essential for survival. So they enable the child to take their first breath. They help with latching on, sucking. We can all remember the little baby where you accidentally stroke their cheek and their head turns and they're looking for the nipple. And that's purely a reflex situation. They are not.
These are all very instinctive, aren't they? It's like that's why it's called primitive, because it's automatic. Yeah.
Yes, it's all based in the brain stem, so that's where it comes from. It's not an intellectual, it's not a cognitive process. You don't give a bottle or a teat or a nipple to a little baby and say, right now we're going to have sucking lessons. The nipple goes in and they instantly know what to do because it's a reflex. It's the same as that, the doctor hits your knee and your knee jumps out. It's exactly the same as that. So the other thing that reflexes do in those early ones, and most people who've had children will remember the startle, the baby startles and they and then the hands come back into the middle. And that's to alert the person who's looking after them that this child's in distress. So primitive reflexes are a process. And so they start, they get used, and then they will integrate, and they should be integrated, most of them, by the time the child's about, well, we say somewhere between 6 and 12 months old. Yeah. And so the first thing that happens is, because this is a process, of course, there's a potential for that process to get interrupted. And
could I interrupt just quickly to just clarify, what is integration? So does this reflex disappear? Is it become part of a more complex motor pattern? What's the kind of consensus on that?
Well, the sad thing is they don't go away completely, because when you're in a rest home, you'll find that quite a lot of your reflexes come back.
It's like a cycle.
So it's a cycle. And because of my excuse me, because of my kinesiology, I also know that reflexes come back when we're under enormous stress. But the process that interrupts the process of integration when children are little is usually some kind of environmental stress or maternal stress. So if their mum is under huge amounts of pressure, then reflexes kind of their process gets interrupted, and that's a little bit of a problem. So that's sort of in a nutshell what primitive reflexes are. They're essential for survival.
Yeah, so they're pretty important. The baby needs them. They're essential, and then we want them to integrate so that they're not running the show, and so that more mature development can take place.
That's right.
More or less. Yeah.
So for these children who I was talking about at the beginning, where they are having various, there's a range of difficulties. I'll talk about those in a minute. It's basically a maturity issue. It's not a deficit, so to speak. So there are some very clear distinctions. So reflexes don't disappear. They integrate, and the body then overrides them successfully, and it becomes a cognitive process. So if I touch my cheek like this, I'm able to say, oh, I'm just touching my cheek with my finger. I don't need to get the reflex going and suck. However, I have seen children who, so I watched a boy in a concert playing the bass guitar. Now, if you remember, children quite often, when they're feeding, they will get their hands like this and they will squeeze the breast at the same time. So this is all part of their process of it's a reflex, and it's part of the whole suck thing and getting as much milk out as they can. But if they don't think this, they don't think to themselves, oh, I'll squeeze the breast and then I'll get better milk.
It's like a kitten prodding.
Yeah, it's purely a reflex. So what I was watching was a 17-year-old play a bass guitar. Now, every time he plucked a string, he had to do this kind of suck, sort of a suck motion that he was doing with his mouth and his tongue. And I sat there and I thought, oh, that poor kid, he's got a suck reflex that hasn't integrated properly. Probably nobody else in the room would have noticed. But unfortunately, that's sort of, the kind of thing I noticed. So that, for that child, and I don't know what his academic situation was like, he was clearly quite good at playing the bass guitar. But he had a reflex that wasn't integrated.
Yeah, because once you notice these things, then you can't help but notice them. And this is a slight segue, but do you know, I played the violin growing up. And when I was in high school, we took videos of our performances. And that was the first time I noticed that I did these really bizarre facial expressions while I was playing, and it included opening and shutting my mouth. So yeah, not quite exactly like that, but yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And just to look back a tiny bit, the reason we're covering this topic of reflexes on a neurodiversity segment is because what we'll do is maybe we could start with the Moro reflex and look at some of the things we see when these reflexes aren't integrated, and you'll see that a lot of these behaviours and traits look an awful lot like a description of ADHD and autism and all these types of diagnoses.
And that's my biggest beef, that quite often children are diagnosed with some, a whole lot of letters or whatever, And essentially, so if you look at the Moro reflex, which is the startle reflex,
Yeah.
and we come back, which they're actually slightly different, startle reflex and the Moro reflex, but anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. There's like the fear, the freeze response, and then there's there's a few different.
The fear paralysis, which develops really early in utero, should be integrated by the time the child's born. It's taken over by the Moro. But anyway, they do things like there's mood swings that go with the Moro, behavioural, sudden changes in behaviour. They have quite aggressive outbursts. They really dislike change. So these are the children who do not cope if, for any reason, the routine gets changed. They often don't like loud noises, panic attacks, distractibility. They have difficulty copying from a whiteboard down onto paper. They have auditory and visual perceptual difficulties. They need to be in control because they don't like that feeling of loss of control. Just a whole range of things along those lines that go with is a present Moro reflex. So we talk about reflexes being present or integrated.
Yeah.
So that's the Moro reflex, and I think that's a really it's a very common one, and it's also very hypersensitivity is another thing that goes with it, and it's one that I think gets affected by stress big time.
Yes, that's what I thought. It's very probably easy to re-trigger it because of a stressful situation. We all know that we get hypersensitive when we're stressed. More likely to freak out if someone taps us on the shoulder or comes up behind us, or all these types of responses. And if you were the mother of one of these babies that you're swaddling them every time, you can't put them down because they feel like they're falling, and then they go whoa. So it's the baby that you can never put down in the cot for a sleep because they fall asleep on you, and then you're like, I might just put you. No. So I had two of these babies, and this response of like going whoa was extreme from when they were tiny, and it lasted a really long time. Yeah.
But that's the other reason why it's that bathing technique. It's called burly bathing, where they flip them over and they tip them over so that they go into the bath face down, their head tipped to the side. So you put their head here and you hold their head to the side, but they're going in tummy first, so they don't go like this, and they don't feel, and they curl up in that sort of fetal position in the bath with their head on their sides, and it solves all those problems until they get a little bit bigger. And for some reason, they don't teach mums. I don't think, I know lots of people don't know. I often teach a new mum, and I go, didn't you get taught how to do this in hospital? And they go, no, nobody need to show me this. I don't know why they've stopped teaching it, but from a reflex perspective, it is absolutely the best way to get a child confident and happy in the bath, and then it's not for very long, and then they're quite happy on their backs because they know it and they understand it. But
yeah. And so I guess what I'm pointing out is some babies are just a lot more sensitive.
Oh yes,
from the get-go, and it's kind of almost a little bit chicken and egg. So you think, is it some stressor? And it might not be obvious. It could be, as you say, maternal stress during pregnancy. It could be even generational stress.
Yeah.
And so they're born more sensitive, and then because they're sensitive, perhaps they're less likely to have the reflexes integrate, or perhaps the reflexes are less likely to integrate because of stress. It's like, which one is it? But it doesn't matter in a sense, because you just work on how do we
repattern them,
help the child to integrate it.
I think also the other thing that when I say maternal stress, it can be your grandmother dying while you're pregnant. Well, what can you do about that? Nothing. Or another one, I had a child came to see me, and I did all my questions and asked them, no, everything was perfect and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, well, I can't, nothing you've told me indicates that this should be such a strong response. He had a lot of reflexes that were not integrated. And then as she was walking out the door, she said, "Oh yeah, just before I had him, I fell over backwards off a chair. Do you think that would do it?" Yeah, that would be the thing. So we had a bit of a laugh about that. But, you know, again, not something she made happen. You know, sometimes it's stuff that's completely out of our control. But the thing about reflexes is that there is something you can do about it. You know, there's lots of things that you can't make any changes with, but reflexes are something that have been shown to be able to make changes with quite successfully. But let me, Kirsty, if you will, talk to you about the spinal gland, because this is a really interesting one. And if anyone hasn't had a baby, do you know about the spinal gland?
Yes.
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 Well, I find the spinal gland really interesting because there are lots of adults who've still got a positive spinal gland. And these are the people who, when they sit in a chair, like me, I'm sitting with my back against the chair, they want to fidget. They just can't sit still. Every time they touch the back of the chair, their hip wants to fly out. And the reason is because this particular reflex is here at the back of the spine, either side of the spine here. And if you get a very little new baby, and I did this to my own son, poor thing, it's probably why he looks like he is. No, he's not, he's gorgeous.
The guinea pig, yeah.
The guinea pig, and you hold the baby up. I did it over the bath because I knew what was going to happen. And you just, with two of your fingers, you just go down the side of the spine at about waist height. You wait about 2 seconds and they pee. And then you wait for a little bit longer and you do it again, a little bit of a rub, and they pee. Now
that's both sides, isn't it? Because if you do one side, they'll do this
twist.
wiggly
so
thing.
You've got to do it on both sides. But what's happening and what's important is that reflex is keeping that little immature bladder empty. So they need that at the start, and that's where, you know, you hold on to them and their bladder. So a new baby has a wet nappy all the time, although with the disposable nappies, most mothers might not know that. But if you use cloth nappies, you know that your baby has got a wet nappy all the time. Now, later on, the problems are that when you're 6 or 7 and you're in bed and the jammies or the sheet or something strokes the back of your a spine and you wet the bed, and that's not considered, you know, you're supposed to be able to have that under cognitive control so that you don't wet the bed. And I don't know what's going on at the moment, but I see, and maybe it's just me, maybe this has been happening all the time, but I seem to be seeing masses of children who are 7, 8, 9, 10, who are still, you know, in a very, you know, lots of the rest of their lives quite mature and going quite well, but they're still wetting the bed. And I haven't quite got to the bottom of why that's happening, but it seems that those children don't integrate their spinal gland. So the modern learning environment, you know, the ILE classrooms with the no walls and everything, they're really good for those children because they can go and find a beanbag to sit on or something else. They don't have to sit in a chair and sit up straight. So I met a woman a while ago and I was talking about this and saying about the spinal gland. She just looked at me and she went, "That's me." She said, "When I go to the movies, if I sit back at the movies, my husband grizzles the entire movie because I fidget and I carry on. But," she said, "if I sit just a little bit away from the chair, problem solved." So she'd worked out how to fix it for herself. She hadn't integrated the reflex, but she'd found a way to stop activating it. So the spinal gland is one that's yeah, it's certainly, and you know, when you see teenagers with really low slung trousers, quite often that's because if they have their trousers up higher, it's too uncomfortable that they just want to fidget all the time and they hate it. Whereas if the trousers are down low, then the problem goes away. So people are quite adaptive, you know, they work ways around the situations.
Yeah, we do adapt, and then but sometimes we're using quite a lot of energy
A lot.
to do that. Yeah.
A lot. Okay, so the other one that I would also like to mention that I really is important from an educational perspective is the ATNR, which is the asymmetric
Yeah.
tonic neck reflex. Now, this is the warrior pose. So the arm bends, the leg bends, the head turns, the arm bends, and the other leg bends. And what happens in a classroom situation is, particularly if they're side on to the teacher, so I'm sitting here with my desk like this, and I've got to turn and look at the teacher who's up over there. So when I do that, I've got my pen, I'm sitting here all ready to get organised. I turn and my hand opens, I drop the pencil, so then I've got to go and find my pencil, and then I've got to get back, and then I've got to, and then I've got to, oh no, it's happened again. So these children are often labelled as not focused and a nuisance in the class, and they often have poor reading skills. They really get lost really easily when they're reading. They might have blurred vision as well. Their eyes don't work together that well. Sometimes they'll rub their eyes, so children will get reddened eyes and they'll rub them. They've got an inability to read small print, but they can read large print. So, you know, that's a little red flag if you've got someone who reads really well when the print's big, but as soon as the print gets small, they don't know what they're doing. And the other problem is that as soon as there gets to be a whole lot of lines on a page, they get completely lost. Whereas, you know, if it's just those one-line books, so it looks like they're reading really well to start with, and then suddenly they hit a whole lot of roadblocks and find it really, really difficult. So the ATNR is one of the reflexes that gets researched a lot, and in the research project that I'm the international one, I'm doing it with people from other countries, which is kind of fun. Yeah. We're looking at the ATNR and the TLR and the STNR, the symmetric tonic reflex. So we're looking at 3 reflexes, and they're the reflexes that there are several reasons why they're studied quite a lot. One, the testing is acceptable within a classroom situation, because the Morrow test is not something you'd be able to do in a classroom. You can do it in a clinic situation, but not in a classroom so well. And then the TLR is quite easy to test, and so is the symmetric tonic neck reflex. They're all quite easy to test, but they definitely have been shown to mess up children's learning later on.
Yeah. So there's all these things. There's focus, there's fidgetiness, there's hyperactivity, there's toileting issues, there's vision problems, there's emotional lability. And so, yeah, a lot of these things can be like, oh, that's just part of their ADHD. That's just part of their ASD. And we just want to be mindful that these things can be going on. And as you said, there doesn't have to be an obvious birth trauma. There doesn't have to be those types of things that are really obvious that have affected development for you to have a look at these reflexes. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So, you know, and it just carries on. The sucking and rooting reflex is one that's very common with some children. You'll get very dribbly babies who have got an underdeveloped suck reflex, so they're not, you know, they're not swallowing well, and yeah, they dribble. They always have a wet, you know, really wet bib. And those children often have what we call manual dexterity issues. So they've got an immature pencil grip. They're really, they struggle eating with a knife and fork. And they also sometimes have trouble with cup handles, all those kind of things. And then it goes on to things like they don't run well, and they trip over things, and they fall a lot. As I said, they've got poor saliva control, and they're really messy eaters. You can watch them eat. It's just like, oh man, how did we get in this big mess? And you're not quite sure how it happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are some of the kind of common ones that children do. Those are the primitive ones. The symmetric tonic neck reflex is the way they get rid of it is, you know, when a baby's just before they start crawling, they rock backwards and forwards on
Yeah,
their
this
hands.
cute little, yeah, so cute.
They're really cute. That's what we call the STNR rock.
Yeah.
And if you've got a baby who's doing that, you want them to do it heaps, not, you know, rush them on or anything. Plenty of opportunity to do all that sort of stuff, because that integrates the reflexes for them then to be able to go on and mature to a higher, you know, get things to be at their chronological age. So parents often will, you know, they'll describe their child, and I'll meet the child, and it's just really obvious that it's an immaturity, as you know. And I say to them often, if your child was 3, these behaviors would be totally acceptable, but because they're 8, somehow it's not. And
That's right.
so
And immaturity is not said in an insulting way, because if they've got these things going on, they don't have a conscious control over it. It's not, yeah.
And so you can tell them off, and you can put them on behavior modification plans, and you're in exactly the same position as you would be if, with the doctor and his hammer, he tried to, you know, he says, right now, don't you let your leg jump out. You know, you can't stop it. And we all know that feeling, because we've all watched our legs jump out when the hammer hits. So these children are kind of in the same situation where, and as they get older, if you ask them and say, you know, what goes on when this happens, they go, I have no idea. So often these children are, they'll have, can't remember if we talked about this last time or not, Kirsty. A lot of times, a lot of things have happened since I talked to you.
Yeah.
But these children often have what I call 8-lane highways. So they might be really good at a whole lot of things, got a whole lot of things worked out, and then they've got a dirt track. And it's often that real, so that you expect that they should be able to operate in the 8-lane highway mode. And then suddenly you find yourself on a dirt track and you wonder, what did I do? What happened? How did this happen? And that's a real telltale sign of a child who's got reflexes going on that are messing up some aspects of their life, but not all of it.
Right, yeah. So you can see that kind of asymmetrical development. They're really advanced here, they're not, and then they're really behind over here. And then, of course, any of these things are going to show up a lot more when the child's under stress, and the particular things that trigger them, you know, are going to vary from child to child in terms of what produces the most extreme stress.
Yeah.
That you'll know as a parent. Yeah. Yeah.
So we also know with these children, I think we talked about this a bit last time, is because they're really sensitive, they often have food sensitivities as well. And so this is why with these children, I think we talked about the child with the cushion and how the cushion had fixed, you know, things in her classroom. And really what had happened was they fixed the diet, I did a balance, we sorted out some reflex stuff. So she's, you know, come a long way, and yet she was going to need an assessment, and, you know, looking for a label to put on her. But in actual fact, by just doing these soft things, and I consider that reflex integration is pretty much a soft fix, because it's gentle, it's nice, the child, it's not hard work, there's no surgery, there's, you know, it's not that expensive, you know, it's a nice soft fix. And for some children, that's all they need, it just changes it.
And I suppose, you know, we say a child's sensitive, but I'm guessing some of these reflexes could fairly directly affect gut health as well. You know, like if you've got your moro reflex and you're producing a lot of cortisol, that affects the gut. If you've got reflexes that affect muscle tone, that can affect gut motility, and, you know, all these things interact with each other as well. Yeah.
So yeah, with the muscle
I'm
tone,
not saying that scientifically, but I'm sure, you know, gut problems are going to be increased.
I think the gut one, I think I've read a research paper about the link between reflexes and the gut. I think that's quite well known. As far as muscle tone goes, muscle tone is one of those funny things. You're actually born with muscle tone. And that's basically how it stays. So if you are born with low muscle tone, you can't change that, but what you can change is the strength of the muscles, your coordination, how you deal with your low muscle tone. And so that's what we have a big effect on. And that's where activity and experiences are really, really important. So reflexes probably don't affect your muscle tone score, but they impact how you can interact with your environment.
Yeah, how you move, coordination, stuff like that.
But they affect that a lot.
Yeah.
So if your coordination is very immature, sometimes that will be because of some retained reflexes that are stopping you from getting to a more advanced way of coordinating.
Yeah, cool. So it affects a lot. And then we talked in the last session a little bit about what we can do to assist. Particularly, we talked about rhythm and movement. But do you want to go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. There's it's growing. That's what's so exciting about this field, is that it's growing and there are more options available to people, which I think is a fine thing. The system that I like, that I've trained in, is rhythmic movement training. And I like that because of, as you said, Kirsty, because of the rhythmic element to it, that the movements are based on things that babies do. It was developed in Sweden. It's not that old, actually. It was developed in Sweden in about 2011. So it's relatively new. There's about the same time, there was a program called the IMPP program, which is a UK-based program. And but we have IMPP people here in New Zealand as well, in Australia. There's Martin McPhillips has done a program called Primary Moves, and that's an interesting program. There are people who know how to do that in New Zealand. There are some children who that one doesn't work quite as well for because of the nature of how it is, but there are other children it works really well. So it's really good that there are options, that it's not just there's not just one system. Kinesiologists, of course, do quite a bit with reflexes, although from my experience, because I've used kinesiology with reflexes for a long time, and it definitely makes a difference. I got some reasonable results just using kinesiology. But when I get my best results is when I mix kinesiology and rhythmic movement, which is why I do them both together. So I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater when I got this newfangled system, the rhythmic movement. I joined them together.
Yeah.
And it certainly seems to mostly hold a lot better than just doing one or the other. And if you just do the rhythmic movement, it works, and it works nicely, but it's slower than if you give them a nice, gentle kick up the bottom with a kinesiology repatterning type process. So
yeah,
that's what I've worked out, but there'll be other practitioners who've worked out things that are, there's some, I talk to people in America and in the UK, and, there's all sorts of really exciting things going on.
Yeah, that's great. And so, if you're looking for someone to help you with reflexes, I would say, do a Google search, look who's in your area, and then interview people, because you've got kinesiologists who know a lot about reflexes. I know a little bit, and I'm working on knowing more, and then some who that's really not their area at all. So, ask people. And then also some osteopaths will have done extra work on working with reflexes. Some chiropractors. And then you've got occupational therapists as well. So
there's quite a few OTs who do the rhythmic movement program, and also osteopaths do the rhythmic movement, because they've worked out that when they mix osteopathy with the rhythmic movement, they get much better results that hold a lot better as well. So we've all worked this out, that you need something to shift the situation energetically works quite well, works very well from my perspective. And then you need something in place that holds it there and helps the body to keep remembering that it's got a new way of being. And that seems to be what helps. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you have something you can keep doing at home,
Yeah,
to help it integrate more. And then, of course, if it's something that's not too onerous, and often rhythm and music makes things more like play and less like a chore, then that's probably really helpful. Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. If you're looking for someone, yeah, don't be afraid to interview people and ask if that's part of what they do and part of their experience, because otherwise you may find that it's not. So, yeah. Mm. And I just have another question while I'm thinking. So, as you said, you were talking about the lady at the movies who was like, So if you're listening to this, you might be thinking about your children, but if you're listening and you think, oh gosh, I think I think I need to do this for me. So if I was to start a program of movement and integration for myself, do you find a lot of adults having success? Is it just slower? Is it just as good?
It's just as good. I've got, well, my own experience was when I first came across rhythmic movement, I learnt one exercise, backsliding, and I learnt how to do it. I thought, oh, this is fun. And I went home, right, I'm going to see how this goes. And so every morning for about 2 months, I'd wake up and I go, oh, yes, I'm going to do my backsliding. You know, I was very excited about it. After 2 months, I'd kind of had enough, and it was the Christmas holidays, and I sort of let it all slide, and I didn't really take much notice of it until I got back into the classroom in February, and it basically started, right, like I've always thought that I was an okay teacher. You know, I do a reasonable job as a teacher. I love teaching. But that particular year, my teaching jumped a quantum leap, and it was things like my receptivity to what the children's needs were, and my ability to work on the fly with what was in front of me just exploded to another level. It was really amazing. And I'd sit there at the end of something I'd done and I'd go, oh, how did that happen? Like, it was that profound, you know. And I'm an experienced teacher, and I thought about it and I thought, well, what's changed? What have I done? You know, I haven't done any courses. I hadn't done anything that would, and I thought it's that backsliding. And then I had a parent who brought his child, and I've kept this child. She's now, I forget what age, she's in her 20s anyway. And with kinesiology, we've kept her off any kinds of drugs. And she possibly, actually, she might be on something just now, a tiny wee anxiety thing, but she hadn't been until just a little while ago, not very long ago. But anyway, the way we kept her off the drugs was through this whole rhythmic movement thing. And it was her dad who brought her one day, and I showed him how to do the backsliding, and he had to have a wee practice so that he could help her when they got home. And anyway, I think it was his wife said to me, oh, my husband's still doing the backsliding. Anyway, that was fine, and everybody was happy. And I saw him about a year later, and he said, oh, I'm still doing my backsliding. I said, really? He said, hell yeah. Why would I stop something that makes my day go so well when it takes me a minute and a half? And I went, well, okay. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting. I've watched him over the years, and I don't know if he's still doing it, but he's in a completely different place to where he was when he started doing the backsliding. So yeah, lots of parents, if their children are backsliding, they just go, oh yeah, that's me. I really struggle to read it on the page. I'm going to do it as well. And so they start doing it too. And yeah, it has a nice effect. I remember one of the really early ones I did was and I wasn't using rhythmic movement at this point. I just balanced on in a reflex way. A friend of mine who was a gorgeous girl, I adored her immensely, but she used to really struggle in social situations, and she couldn't find the words she wanted to use. She'd get confused, and and then she had a drink, she'd say all sorts of silly things, and people used to laugh behind her back and tease her, which really hurt me because she was such a sweet, kind, genuine person. I just thought it was mean. Anyway, when I learned about this rhythmic, the reflexes, I just went, oh yeah, that's my girl. I'm going to get her on my table. I need a guinea pig. So I rang her up and said, come on, come lie on my table. I want to, do this to you. Yeah, right. Oh, she was keen, came lie on the table. Anyway, about 2 or 3 months later, I saw her in a social situation, and we were at one of those long, skinny tables where, and I wasn't really in her conversation, but I was trying to hear what was going on because I looked over and there were 4 people, 2 on the side and people either side of her, who were completely riveted to her conversation. And I had a look and I went, I don't believe it. And then I had a look again to see if she'd maintained it. Anyway, she did. And they were laughing and she was joking, and the conversation was clearly they were respecting what she was talking about. And it was just like a real light bulb moment for me. Now, that girl who got hit on the knuckles at school because she couldn't do maths very well, she makes speeches, she's climbed lots of great big mountains, she's done all sorts of incredibly wonderful things because suddenly she found her confidence. I can. And that's part of what sometimes goes with the reflexes as well. People's self-confidence isn't as good as it might be, and you give it back to them and they just fly. And she has I watch her with such awe, and she's a gorgeous girl, one of my dearest friends.
Yeah, I love that. That's incredibly just optimistic that there's no kind of age limit on it. There's no cap on whether or not primitive reflexes is a small or a huge part of the puzzle for any one person. It's worth looking at it, and it's yeah, I think a lot of the time people think, oh, well, if you haven't fixed it by the time you're this age or that age, then you can't. And I push back against that with nearly everything, but it's really great to, when you see evidence of these positive changes happening.
Yeah, well, I've got multiple stories like that. Those happen to be 2 of my really nice ones, but I've got lots of people where it's just changed their lives and how they are within their life relatively easily. So, yeah, it's a really good thing to look at, but it's particularly good for children who are in their formative years to get onto it quite quickly. I used to wait, because I can tell the signs when children are quite young, whether there's a reflex issue. And I used to wait and think, oh no, I'll wait till they're 2 and to give them a chance to integrate them for themselves. And that I'll wait. And then as I got more confident myself with it, I go, well, I'll wait till they're 18 months old. Now I don't wait. I just get in there. If I know that it's been a really stressful delivery, or I know whatever I know, I don't even wait. I just go get in there, and again, I feel more confident and I do more. And I've got softer options for babies. I don't do the big full-blown reflex integration balance that I do with somebody who's older. But for tiny wee babies, I get right in and get them going and get them doing the stuff that they should be doing, teach the mums what to do, and it seems to be really good. I've got a group of 5-year-olds, I think, and certainly the ones I've had since they were babies, they're just so beautifully rounded and integrated and just exactly how I want them, So it's certainly, I have got a lot more confident, I suppose, about getting in there a bit earlier, not waiting, don't wait.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, get in there early if you can, but if it's later on down the line, don't despair.
That's okay. Yeah, don't not do anything just because you didn't get. I always say to people, right time, right place. If you've found yourself, they find themselves here, and the child's 9 or 10, and they go, oh, I should have come earlier. I should have. And I go, no, right time, right place. You're here at the right time, right place.
That's right, and don't feel guilty. Like me, for example, I was already studying kinesiology when my first child was born, and I meditated and I did yoga every day and I did hypnobirthing and I ate organic food, and and then my baby was born and he was just like this stiff little ball of screaming pain, and it was heartbreaking, and it and I did do that whole like, well, what could I have done differently? And sometimes you're just supposed to have things come to you like that so that you can work through the challenge and they can work through the challenge. And
I'm reading a book at the
yeah.
moment, Kirsty, called I forget what it's called now. But anyway, it's talking about this whole business of asking the question, not why did this happen to me, but what am I learning from this?
Yeah,
What am I
totally.
getting out of this? What are my children teaching me? So those forward-focused questions are the best ones, and they're the ones that will get the response. You know, there's a mother that's asking, right, what can we do next, and how can we sort this, and what and how, is the mother that will get a really good result, rather than sort of letting it immobilize you.
Yeah, I agree. You learn, and then often you take your learnings and you'll help other people, even if it's just from comments in passing or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to
I think we've done
add?
pretty well. I think we've sort of identified the issues, and really this whole thing is about awareness. There are lots of conventionally trained people where they don't view this as an issue yet. It's growing. I think some friends of mine got an article, I haven't seen it, but I think it got published in the Lancet. So that's really exciting, if that kind of thing can happen, because it's just getting more of this thing into the mainstream area, which is what we want, you know. The more it goes into mainstream, the better. So the more people who understand about it, the better it is. Yeah. So this is why these kind of podcasts are really good. Good on you for
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And it's been a really great conversation, and I hope if you're listening, you get something out of it. And it might be relevant to you, it might be relevant to someone you know, and particularly perhaps look into it if you see developmental things with your child, if they have trouble with feeding, if they skip crawling, any of those obvious things, particularly have a look. And yeah, it could be really helpful. Yeah, so thank you so much, Tessa. We'll finish up there for tonight, and who knows, perhaps we'll have you on again. We might think of something else. So, yeah,
Oh, sweet. Thanks, Kirsty. It's lovely to talk to you. I really appreciate it.